The Dallas Cowboys have officially lost Tony Pollard in free agency. What's next for the Cowboys at running back? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $200 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're discussing the legal tampering period, which means free agency will start for the Cowboys in about a week and a half, right? I mean, or so. No, they could lose players. The Cowboys are going to lose some players over the next couple of days. We got our first name that came off the board this week. It's Tony Pollard going to the Tennessee Titans on a 3-year, $24 million deal. According to several reports, the Cowboys were in on Tony Pollard, but got outbid by the Titans. Your initial reactions to the move are?
That your initial love of whatever type of barbecue that you like always wins out, right? Like if you're from Memphis, you're going to miss that Memphis barbecue. If you're from Texas, you're going to miss that Texas barbecue. And I think he just wanted some of that home cooking.
Well, remember his family has a restaurant shop. Yeah,
that's right. They have a barbecue shop. So maybe he just felt like he needed to get back on the grill again. Look, I mean, I like Tony Pollard. I kind of wanted it back. I think we've talked about it in these last few weeks. But I'm thrilled for him. I love the guy. He seems like a really good guy. It's great for him to go back home. I know he loves Memphis. He loves being from there. He loves his family. So all of that is very positive. It's very interesting where it kind of leads the Cowboys, just because, you look around at the landscape and, we're doing this as free agency is breaking right now. And it seems like the market has been kind of set right now at the top end for running backs at about $8 million a year. But it depends. Like, we'll see how some of this funny money comes out because, this could be a little bit kind of different than what we're seeing initially reported. But I think that, it's interesting the fact, obviously, that Tony Pollard is off the market and he's not an option for the Cowboys. But it also is interesting in the fact that you're seeing at least two running backs that are kind of, frankly, the two most similar, I would say, that are on the market, Swift and Pollard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting very similar deals, right? 3-year, $24 million. I mean, obviously, the individual deals will be different, but we'll see what that is. But I do think it shows you exactly what we're looking at for the market. What it's going to cost potentially, it's probably going to be based off of those two deals. And, for the Cowboys, it may be time to start looking at plan B, and which may be more of an emphasis on going to get somebody in the draft.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about what the plan is for the Cowboys at the running back position. But just really quickly, because I know there's going to be some Titans fans that tune into this podcast to hear us talk about Tony Pollard. One of the reasons that we were a little bit maybe hoping that the Cowboys would bring back Tony Pollard is because we thought at the end of the year, specifically like the second half of the year, you started to see some of that juice. And he started to look like the explosive player that we saw in 2020, 21, 22. I also think he really improved as a pass blocker over the last couple of years. And he really is now a complete 3-down back. So if you're a Titans fan, and you have all this money to spend, and you've got a young quarterback with a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator, I do think you're getting a really good player still. And I know we talk about guys, running backs, how they decline really quickly. I do think Pollard, because of limited touches at the beginning of his career, can be a really effective player still at age here, 26 and 27.
Oh, yeah. I think Tennessee got a good deal. I mean, this is a guy that, look, I mean, we're not huge on paying running backs in general, but I think, this is a guy that is probably being paid appropriately. Like you mentioned, showed a level of explosiveness returning from what was, a gruesome injury at the end of last season. Played all 17 games, didn't have any
All
kind of
17 games.
setback, which is incredibly impressive considering the injury. And I think steadily and impressively got better as the injury healed, and got better technically as a pass protector, like you mentioned. I think that the Titans got a great running back. I mean, look, Derrick Henry is a legend for that organization. I think Tony Pollard is a fantastic replacement for that kind of legacy. He's a completely different kind of running back, but still very, very utilitarian. Like, he can be used at any sort of way. He can be used as your main running back. He can be used in the passing game. He can be used in a variety of different ways. He can do everything you need a running back to do, to be like your main bell cow back. I think Tennessee's going to be happy with the sign.
Yeah, he's going to go play on a team that's going to have Bill Callahan coaching the offensive line, running some of that wide. I actually just think it's a great fit for Pollard. And I think the Cowboys, again, the report from Josina Anderson and Diane Rossini was that the Cowboys were in on Tony Pollard, but I think they were hoping to get him more in that $4 to $5 million range. And that's just not realistic, I don't think, because Pollard's a better player than $4 to $5 million a year, especially with the cap going way, way up.
Yeah, I mean, the thought was, he kind of, even though the results were good at the end of the year, they weren't exactly what you were expecting, especially from the touchdown front. I think as he was kind of working back from the injury, the Cowboys were hoping to get him on a buy low situation, right? Because he was coming off of an injury on a injury shortened, well, not injury shortened year, but coming back of an injury off a surgery shortened, preseason. And hoping that, he would kind of slip through the cracks a little bit. They'd get him on a cheap deal. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's just too many teams out there with too much cap space. And obviously they liked what they saw in Tony Pollard. And when that's the case and you've got all this money, you can afford to kind of spend $2 or $3 more million a year than, maybe another team would on this level of running back.
We're going to talk about what the Cowboys plan to do here at the running back position, because again, we got a report from Josina Anderson that the Cowboys aren't expected to bid up on the top running backs in the market. And again, as of this recording, that would be Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry. I think of those three, Henry is the most realistic. At least we've heard some rumblings that Henry would like to come to the Cowboys. I've got my doubts about that, but let's talk about what the Cowboys are going to do at the running back position next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Landon, let's talk about what the Cowboys are going to do at running back now that Tony Pollard is officially off the board. What is your expectation here?
Well, yeah, I wonder if it isn't a pivot now, right? To move on towards a draft situation, see what's available there. I'm sure they're going to continue. I mean, look, I think they're going to continue to watch the market, see how it plays out. I mean, I think this is one of the markets that they're just going to keep their eye on, right? Because I think The numbers are going to be all over the place. It is nice to get 2 running backs with back-to-back very similar deals. So maybe there is a way that you could figure out a deal with one of these top end guys that's something similar to this if you're interested. But it doesn't necessarily. I mean, look, the Cowboys weren't willing to pay Tony Pollard this much money. I don't know that they're necessarily willing to pay, Henry or some of these other guys that much money. So it's going to be interesting to see if like those numbers need to come down a little bit before they become players in the running back market. Otherwise, I would say it really feels like the draft is a good choice here. They have Rico Dowdle. Maybe you cobble together a running back room with Dowdle and a draft pick and maybe another veteran or something like that, right? There's tons of options still here for the Cowboys. That's the thing about it, is that's so beneficial for the Cowboys to be in the market this year, is that because of all the free agent running backs available and all of the kind of middle round running backs that are available, there is a lot of choice for the Cowboys, even with Pollard, walking out on this kind of deal.
I want people to remember that the Cowboys are still paying Ezekiel Elliott $7 million for the 2024 season. So when you factor in how much you're paying a running back room, remember that. I don't feel like the Cowboys can spend more than a couple million there. I think you can go out and get a veteran, but I don't think it can be anybody more than a few million a year. So that's why on last week's show, Landon, you and I were mentioning names like Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Antonio Gibson. Bring in one of those players, sign Rico Dowdle back to a vet minimum deal, and then draft a running back in the 2nd or 3rd round. You're not pigeonholed into having to draft a running back in round 2 if a couple of the guys come off the board. But if there's good value with either of those spots, you could do that. I would have to assume that's the plan now. I would have to.
Yeah, wait until the draft to get your juice, right? Because that's the thing, is that here with Pollard, you were thinking maybe you could sign, him to a cheap deal, and he's your juice, and that's fine, and you got a good deal. Didn't work out that way. That's fine. You could pivot away from that. You could still sign a middling veteran guy that, like we talked about. There's tons of those guys, and they will be available when the Cowboys start free agency in May. And so I think that they can look at this and go, okay, I don't know if will it be willing to pay the Jacobs, the Henrys, the Barkleys, what they want. Let's let them kind of go through the process, see what those numbers look like. And then what's the 2nd and 3rd tier of the running back rooms look like? Maybe we pair one of those guys who has a very specific skill with a running back in the draft that has a complementary skill. And that could be a really, really good solution, just as good as Tony Pollard. And that's why this is all fine, because there's just a lot of different ways to assemble a very good running back room. You don't have to necessarily pay one guy a whole bunch of money.
Yeah, and this running back market is going to dry up fast, because while there's a lot of names out there, there aren't a lot of teams that have needs at running back. Most teams have their running backs, and there's just not a lot of teams that are willing to spend a lot of money for a running back. The Titans and Bears are 2 of the teams with most cap space. They just locked theirs down, right? I think you'll see maybe the Eagles get involved. Again, we're recording this an hour after the legal tampering period has started. I think you'll see 2 or 3 other teams get in the mix, and then the bottom is going to fall out of this market. And I think that's where the value is in this class, is waiting until Friday or Saturday and grabbing the 6th or 7th best running back on the board. Because what these free agent running backs don't want to do is they don't want to wait until the draft, because once the draft happens, then all these spots get filled. And while this isn't a top heavy draft for running backs, it's loaded with mid-round talent. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're hoping to get a job after the draft. That doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, honestly, I think getting the best time for a team to be buying on a running back is right before the draft, right? Because running backs will be desperate to try to get a deal before the draft. And if you get a couple of these guys who are, like names that are maybe not getting the contracts they want, if you can squeeze them all the way into the draft, you might be able to get a really good deal, knowing that for these running backs, they're going to, if if they don't get a deal before the draft, then they're probably going to end up waiting a long time after the draft because nobody's going to want to sign a running back right after the draft. And the next time that anyone's going to want to spend any money on running backs is not until way after training camp. So some running backs may feel that kind of desperation as it gets closer to the draft, and maybe you're able to get a second tier, third tier running back on a cheap deal simply to get, off the market before the draft comes.
Is there a name out there, just one name that you would like to have the Cowboys sign?
No, I mean, I honestly no, because you look at the list and it's like there's tons of these guys. There's so many of them. I mean, we can go over the list, but it's like I look at them and there's just like tons of them that can all different, like you piece them together like with different guys. And I think that's really the key there, right? I'm trying to pull up a list real quick, but it's one of those things where if you sign player X and they fit with player Y, then that's like how you cobble together a working running back room. Like I think there's these guys at the top, like we talked about Jacobs and all them, that if you wanted to get a singular player to run to be your loan back, then you can sign those guys. But outside of that, if you don't want that, there are tons of guys available that can share the load. You talked about J.K. Dobbins. I'm just looking at the middle of this list. I mean, J.K. Dobbins is a guy who's very talented, young, but he's dealt with some injury stuff. Maybe you take a flyer on him. Rashad Penny is a guy that played for the Eagles at different points, but it's like you could get him really cheap, and maybe you have a decent, young, kind of bruiser back. I mean, all these guys have warts, but it's like you're going to be able to get them incredibly cheap, and like I said, you can pair them with somebody else, and maybe you found something there.
When I was looking at this list of free agent running backs, one of the things I saw is that if you want the between the tackle grinder, right, you can get that player for pretty cheap. And I think that's maybe what you do is you sign Gus Edwards or Zach Moss and you sign them to a cheap deal. And then in the draft, you draft your dynamic playmaker, right? The guy that's in the Tony Pollard mold, because those guys are harder to find. I think that's probably what the Cowboys are going to look to do here, because you mentioned it. Like there's just a ton of those type of running backs out there. We'll see who the Cowboys decide to target this week in free agency. Landon, as we are recording, we got some news about another Dallas Cowboys starter leaving. We will discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament, whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. That is $200 in bonus bets to use on point spreads, money lines, or you can even just pick who you think is going to win it all. That's quite a payout there. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day, we're going to continue to cover free agency over the next few days. We're gonna get a lot of news, so make sure you guys are tuning in. We will post a show every single day. But Landon, as you and I were doing this show, we got news that Dorance Armstrong has left the Dallas Cowboys, signing with the Washington Commanders. While the numbers haven't been officially released yet, it sounds like he got a pretty good chunk of change from Washington. Are you surprised that Dorance Armstrong is on his way out?
No. I think you and I both anticipated that he was probably gone, that he was probably going to cost more than the Cowboys were willing to pay. And again, like another guy that, hey, all the kudos he deserves and deserves every bit of this money. I could not be more thrilled for him. I don't like that he's playing for Washington. But I mean, we've seen a lot of great players go to Washington and, play for Washington. I think that Dorance is a guy that we talked about. Is just has skills as a defender that have really developed over these last few years. Has been a guy that you can reliably count on for 6 to 8 sacks on limited snaps, and then on top of being a very, very, very good special teams player. So we figured that they weren't going to be able to pay the kind of money that they were going to need to pay to keep him, especially when considering that they're going to have to pay Micah Parsons. They're already paying Dorance Armstrong. I mean, not DeMarcus Lawrence. I think this isn't surprising. And again, despite the fact that he went to Washington, I'm thrilled that Dorance is getting a big payday. What a story for a 20-year-old who came into the 20-year-old 4th-round pick, came to the Cowboys, really turned himself into a player into this league.
And look, we're talking about 2 former 4th-round picks for the Cowboys that just got big paydays.
Yeah.
And Cowboys franchise tagged Tony Pollard, so they got that extra year out of him. And they already gave Dorance Armstrong 1 deal, and now he's on, or really his 2nd deal. Now he's on his 3rd deal.
No,
this is where the Cowboys need to get a lot of credit. Like, they are very good at finding quality players on day 3 of the draft. And you can't always keep those players. They kept Dorance Armstrong for as long as they could, as long as it made financial sense. And now he's off to go get a bigger paycheck. You can't blame them at all. Just very happy for Dorance, because he's always been a guy where, he's done a lot of dirty jobs for the Cowboys. He's played special teams, has moved inside the defensive tackle. It's not a surprise to see him follow Dan Quinn. It's not a surprise to see the Cowboys let him walk either.
No, and again, nothing but support for him, because I mean, it feels like the parent that's watching their kid leave the house, right, to finally go off to college is like, I hate to see him go, but I'm so proud of him. I can't get over how much he's grown, and it's like that, and so I'm thrilled to see him go, thrilled to see him get a big payday. Just hope he has a sore hammy the weeks that he plays the Cowboys.
One thing we should mention is that the Cowboys do have a need at defensive end, especially if Micah Parsons is going to be playing more over the center in Mike Zimmer's defense, right? You've got DeMarcus Lawrence in the last year of his deal. You've got Sam Williams, and then that's basically it. So I don't know if the Cowboys are going to target a defensive end early in free agency. The names are kind of drying up pretty quickly there, but it is a spot that I feel like they need to at least add 1 veteran body before the draft.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised they pulled the trigger on a body in the draft either. There's the need lines up with the value there, and so I wouldn't be shocked if they decided they wanted to pull a trigger on a defensive end in the draft as well. But yeah, I would say defensive end is a need that is kind of sneaky, because how deep the Cowboys were at the position last year. But if you look at the way the contracts and everything's rolling in, what happens, especially if Sam Williams doesn't hit this year, then you're really kind of at a cupboard is bare sort of situation, especially if you suffer an injury.
Yeah, he's one of the biggest X factors on the team, because the Cowboys really need him to step up, to maybe not be a starter, but to be that 3rd defensive end, or else maybe you have Chauncey Golson transition back to a full-time defensive end. Maybe Junior Fajoku is somebody that can play defensive end. I don't know. But to me, just looking at their roster, they seem like they would be the type of team that would be interested in adding Zadarius Smith on a 1-year deal. I'm just throwing out a name, like a pass rusher like that on a 1-year rental, just to give them a little bit of a safety net in case Sam Williams doesn't work out. Like, I can't imagine what this defense would look like if, heaven forbid, Micah Parsons went down for 2 games.
Yeah, and the pass rush wasn't anything, and then suddenly, what is this defense doing? So yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I think defensive end is a position that they are going to be looking at pretty heavily for the rest of the offseason.
So we've seen 2 starters come off the board so far for the Cowboys: Tony Pollard, Dorance Armstrong. Any predictions on who the next starter will be that leaves?
I don't want to say Tyron Smith, because I just don't want to say it. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we talked about defensive ends. I don't know if Fowler is going to go out and sign with somebody, right away, but
maybe the same team as Armstrong.
What did you say?
Maybe he signs with the same team as Armstrong.
Certainly is a possibility that they, are a package deal. But yeah, no, I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up signing with Washington. And again, I just wouldn't be surprised if we lost a couple other defenders that are free agents to Washington.
Yeah, there's just one more I wanted to mention. We heard some rumblings over the weekend that the Cowboys have allowed Michael Gallup to seek a trade.
Yeah,
basically it means that they're going to cut him here in the next couple of days unless they hear something else. I posted on Twitter that I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys approached Michael Gallup about a reduced contract right? Because I don't know what the wide receiver market is going to look like for Michael Gallup, who has not had 450 yards in any of the last 3 seasons. But we'll see. Maybe the Cowboys just want to start over at that wide receiver room and try to get a little bit younger.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. They're trying to do what they can to get something out of from Gallup, but I just don't know that anyone's going to be interested there. And I think it's more than likely that they're just looking to kind of start fresh there.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. And if we get any breaking news, we'll make sure we do some Locked On Nows, which you can look for probably next week sometime or something. We'll see. Make sure you check out those. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We will see you next time.